Hi, I'm Jeremy Tillman, and today on Founder at 50, my guest is John Biggs, a former journalist who wrote over 11,000 TechCrunch posts and has interviewed the likes of Jeff Bezos. Now, after years of covering startups, John spent over a decade building them himself. Today, he hosts the Keep Going podcast, where he's recorded hundreds of conversations with founders. We go way back in time discussing hand-coding HTML in the 90s to launching Crunch Gear, and then pivoting into his own startups such as Jaywalk. Our paths have crossed 3 times together, first as Carnegie Mellon students, again when he was a Crunch Gear reporter and I was building the original Slingbox, and now most recently both as entrepreneurs. Thanks again, John, for offering to be one of my first 5 interviews on the Founder at 50 podcast. Now let's jump on in. Hey, John, how's it going today?
Howdy.
Nice to see you. We've known each other for a heck of a long time.
Like quarter of a century.
That's not okay to say out loud. I think.
We were just talking
Doesn't
about how
feel
all the songs of our youth, like Weezer, are the equivalent of oldies back when we were kids. Our parents were listening to like whatever Chubby Checker. Literally the same thing.
I was on some classic rock station and they played Motley Crue, and I'm like, no, it's just it just isn't. So John, we've known each other since basically the mid '90s, right?
Yep.
I'd love for you to give a quick where were you then? And where were you in your early 20s?
Sure. We were the burgeoning generation on the internet. We were the first people to actually use it. We actually understood it. We were like using Gopher and Elm and all these like command line utilities that if you think about what's happening right now with AI, for example, the interface is mostly text, not a lot of GUI, and the information we're getting is kind of cheesy. So we were exactly that same position. You could get some good information, but you didn't have Google. You didn't have any way to search anything up until a couple of years into our education. I studied information systems at Carnegie Mellon with you, and we were hanging out, and we had access to early entrepreneurial tools. We had access to like VB Script, which was was it VB Script? Active Server Pages, ASP.
Well, VB Script, right? It was Visual Basic and Visual Basic Script for ASPs. There was what's the one, the Perl? There were Perl scripts.
Yeah, you could write Perl.
There was a lot of Perl scripting. I learned PHP and JavaScript as sort of two of my early coding on the web tech. But I came out of college and I was building web pages for companies.
Yeah.
It was 96 100%. And I was literally hands-on in the HTML world. What were you doing professionally, let's say 2021 to 25? How'd you get going out there job-wise?
It was easy. You could, if you had a pulse, you could get hired because that was the Y2K days. So I went to work for a company called American Management Systems. That was like a big consulting company, and I didn't really like computers that well. I did information systems and I did creative writing. I went to DC, worked there for a little while, wrote documentation for some big like government billing systems. I went down to Oxford, Mississippi one time to become a automatic OCR because their OCR system was breaking for tax returns. So people were filling out these tiny little tax returns, like literally one little tiny page. The OCR couldn't handle it. So we were sent down there as consultants to go sit and fix and like do it by hand.
There's a funny overlap. I had worked with a company called Visioneer at the time. They had then these little portable scanners. So picture like a scanner the size of a paper towel roll. Right?
Yep.
And so OCR, for those who are especially too young, is optical character recognition. It's basically reading the text on screen. Would you have said, if I popped out of a time machine right then, John, be like, hey, in 30 years, you're going to have a phone, the early days of cell phones, you already knew what that was. But your phone would be able to take a picture of a typed document or even a handwritten document and give you a perfect representation. Was that
100%
in your reality at the time?
Yeah, that would have been perfectly. That would have been perfectly expected. For me at that point, I knew that all this good technology was coming. I knew it was on its way, and I knew it would only get better, which was kind of important. I don't think a lot of people saw technology in terms of like looking out a window and seeing something like go by, but they didn't see the whole trip, right? So we kind of saw the whole trip.
Interesting.
And some folks that I went to school with, Justin Fiddler, for example, he turned what he had built in college in like active server pages into a business that he is still running today.
Oh, amazing.
A lot of people have used the things that they learned early on. And this was kind of like I said, this was the early tools of entrepreneurship.
Sure.
And what they basically taught us was build fast and fail fast. So instead of sitting there and like doing a business plan and saying we got to do X, Y, Z, the information systems folks basically said, here's a way to code. If you can figure out how to get it on the web, that's fine. But otherwise, you can use Access or whatever else you want to use, any coding language, and just build stuff for people and see what they think. And that was the ethos that we took from school. I'm not sure how many other schools did it the same way, but I'm pretty sure a lot of American schools specifically did it that way, just because it was, to a degree, it was almost easier.
I think that's a fair statement. So with that going on in your head and seeing the beginning of where technology and the internet's obviously going to start taking us, I'm curious, were you a person at that age who had a vision for yourself? Were you, this is where I'm going to be where I'm 35, 40, 50, 70, whatever?
I kind of did. I saw that I didn't want to sit and write one piece of code for 5 years. I wanted to write 500 things per year. And that's how I became a journalist. I went to NYU got a master's in journalism, business and economic journalism, which didn't have an internet portion. They really didn't have that kind of thing. This was 2003, 2004. When I got there, they were still teaching you how to shoot on film. And that department didn't have a website. I built their website for them.
Amazing.
And I ran it on a server that was somebody's old PC underneath a desk somewhere, and I was just sat there. And I was also writing for the New York Times because I was one of the few people who could do gadget writing. I understood hardware, and I was writing for gadgets. So I wrote multiple pieces for the New York Times back when it was still on paper. If you see this piece right here, you can't really see what it is, but that's my first circuits article, and that's faded newsprint that's been on my wall since, I don't know, 2002 or something like that.
Which is again where our worlds re-overlapped. That was when I was delving into hardware to when I was at Sling. Mm-hmm. Did you want to be a journalist for the rest of your career?
I wanted to do whatever I wanted at any time. So journalism was the easiest way to do that. If I wanted to write a book, I could write a book. If I wanted to code, I could code. If I wanted to go live in Poland for a year, I could do that. So that's how I built my career. That, to a degree, that's kind of a hindrance when I did my startups. I did multiple startups, and I was trying to juggle the responsibilities associated with running a startup with the need for making cash, like supplying for my family, etc. I was basically a journalist from about 2000, like a hardcore journalist, 2004 to 2011, maybe 14. I think we did our first startup, Freemit, in 2014. Which is when I quit TechCrunch full time and became like a startup founder, and I was a CEO. And the goal there was to write a remittance system using cryptocurrency as the balancer internationally.
And you were a little ahead of the crypto curve.
Yeah, way ahead of the crypto curve. We were so ahead that it was just stupid. So we made many poor choices. We came around when Revolut was coming around, and Revolut actually wanted to talk to us and maybe buy us out, but we were like, we're too cool for that, so we're not going to do that. Now, in retrospect, we probably should have done that.
I think before we go on, I think it's first of all, we all have those hindsight moments, right? I remember when I was doing a startup called Mediabolic, we were like Roku way too soon, but I think we had similar philosophies. Like, this is what's coming. Right? Like, John, like you knew what was coming. So to have, I'm not going to go with hubris because obviously I don't know how you treat it, but to have that sense of, no, why would I sell this thing right now? We can go build this amazing thing. I think it's a very normal phase for any entrepreneur.
I think that's a very early phase, right? So if I wanted to plant an orchard and somebody came by and said, I want to buy all your land for potentially more than I paid for it, and you don't know if the trees are going to be blooming or blossoming properly, or you're going to get enough fruit. The older entrepreneur says, yeah, why not? I'll make a profit, and then I'll maybe buy another orchard somewhere else or do something else. Whereas the younger entrepreneur says, no, I want to make sure, I think my apple trees are going to produce so much profit because I'm not quite aware of what the apple tree market is like. I don't know what I can sell cider for. There's a lot of known unknowns in my life that I maybe refuse to look at. And to a degree, taking that risk is great because it's, first off, it's fun and it's exciting. And second off, potential for, I don't know, your cider to sell for $1,000 a bottle is there, but it's also there to sell for 50 cents a bottle. And as we know, most of the time you land on the 50 cent side.
So have you over the years developed any methodology that that you find has advanced the way you can make those kind of evaluations? Have you figured out when is it a bird in the hand?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's basically I wrote 11,000 posts for TechCrunch about startups. So my view on startups is that I've seen a lot of them before. But when somebody comes at me with an idea, I'm like, okay, well, I've seen that before. It doesn't work. Like,
Right.
well, this works for XYZ. Like, yeah, that's fine. That's what everybody else said. And that cynicism does not lend itself to creativity. It's a detriment to a degree.
Sure.
I have to kind of check that. For example, I was talking with the CMU group, and they want to build an AI TA system, like a teaching assistant. And there's plenty of reasons why they shouldn't do it, but the one reason why they should do it is that they're going to build something, and it'll teach them how to build before they leave college. Something that nobody ever taught us, right?
Very true.
So even having that experience is valuable. Maybe it's not going to work, but at that point in their career, especially when they're 21, doesn't really matter.
Well, so I might flip that around in a lesson learned. I might say something like, if you're young and in those moments, like, it's about the experience. It's about, you're as likely to get it right as wrong and figure out that, apples are about to be like the hottest fruit ever, or there's a blight coming, right? And I think embracing that you're not quite sure stage when you're younger is the thing to do. Reminding, for lack of a better phrase, the kids today, like, go have the experience, go figure it out, because that'll be a thing you'll always have, and no matter what, you'll learn something from it.
Yeah, no, it's well worth fighting for a little bit. And I think the only benefit that we get from experience is that a lot of stuff is easy to us, right? So if you tell me I need to make an LLC and I need to do a cap table and I got to talk to investors and I got to do all this stuff, right now I can do that in a heartbeat. We could spin up a business literally on this call,
Sure.
and send out a bunch of emails, and we might have something if it was a good idea. Whereas when we were first starting out, we didn't have any of that understanding, and building that understanding up over time is key as well. It's not like I think that the reason why this process will never be replaced by AI is that it's not a Stack Overflow answer. It's not typed in this, now type in this, now type in this, and then now you have your business and it should be running. It's something with a lot more nuance.
I think that's really well said. And there's something else you touched on in there a little earlier, is that the notion of, like, if the two of us were to go off and, like, so we brainstorm an idea right now, we're up on Lovable, doing things, having fun. The other thing that you and I get to do is send a couple of emails. There's someone out there we know, no matter what idea we would come up with on this phone call, right? Apple farms for goat herders who want to sell on crypto markets in Turkey, right? Whatever. Yep. There's a market, we know someone to make a phone call, right? And that's something I would argue a little bit to not be underlooked, especially for younger folks entering a world with so much remote first work, is how are you investing in some of those networks and building out those connections that you and I just got to do by sort of being and going.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame that a lot of the quote unquote kids these days don't have access to those networks that we had. We went to Disrupt every year for years, and we were there during the heyday of the tech startup conference. TechCrunch essentially defined the theater of entrepreneurship, right? And I helped do that by flying around the world and going into, like, Charleston, South Carolina, and running a startup event that they had never seen before. They really didn't do those things. It wasn't expected. So the people who were building businesses at that point were just doing them all by themselves, and all of a sudden they had this networking opportunity, and we gave a lot of people a lot of opportunity to meet each other, and they might be working in the same office, but they had never talked. So
I'm curious, John, when you were at, whether it's TechCrunch or before, when I think of you, it's funny, like, I have to remind myself of you as a journalist because I've known you for so long, but to me you are so much a builder and storyteller. Like, that's a bit of how I frame you. When you were at TechCrunch, did you have the opportunity, in the midst of those 11,000 articles, were you building a thing? Was there, beyond just your byline profile?
I mean, we built. We started Crunch Gear, which was the gadget site for TechCrunch.
Sure.
And we had to run our own server. So we ran our own server, like the team did. We built an entirely separate WordPress instance that was running on top of Crunch Gear, that was going to be like best friends. So it was BFF, and it was going to be like sort of like a readers could submit their own reviews, and some of the BFF stories would come to the fore. All this other stuff was kind of like a forum that we had created ourselves. we coded that all ourselves, and we figured out how to like do automatic crossover if we wanted, etc., and have anybody sign up. It was all kinds of fun stuff. And then I was coding, I don't know, analysis tools for data. So if somebody sent a massive data set, we could get in there and we could figure it out before anybody else did, because we were technical. Nobody else was really technical. A lot of journalists that came out of, especially those years, they had no technical background. I mean, they still don't really. They're like, a lot of the journalists are basically like, I don't know, art history majors or whatever, who just stumbled into working for a magazine about laptops or a website about laptops.
And did you ever feel any wrestling with identity around journalist, builder, creator, etc.? Or was it was it a clean picture in your head, or more of a Picasso kind of thing?
No, it was difficult, because when I was a journalist, I was writing about people who were becoming successful, and I didn't see, because of, I don't know, because of my own myopia, I couldn't see my own success. The fact is, I was on stage with, I don't know, I was interviewing Jeff Bezos, I was on stage with the Winklevoss twins, I was emceeing events, all this other good stuff. But that wasn't my success, right? I wanted to be one of these psychopaths with like a, I don't know, a beach house and a Ferrari, and who started mining Bitcoin using an electric toothbrush or something like that in 2008. And figured out life after that. And also, the biggest issue with me in terms of being a journalist is I wasn't a trusted business person. I wasn't a trusted operator. I was the dude you went to if you wanted to get your startup talked about. So I was everybody's best friend up until the point when I wasn't a journalist anymore.
Interesting.
So I lost that juice pretty quickly.
A lot of your peers, a lot of former journalists I've noticed, especially in tech and startup life, ended up at least dabbling in and around venture capital. Was that something you'd ever thought about?
It wasn't even nominated, right? I think in my specific case, I wasn't thinking as hard about the things that the boffins of SF were thinking about. I wasn't thinking about Apple and Google and what's the next Apple and Google. I was thinking about what's the next Slingbox, right? Because those were small problems that needed to be fixed. I was thinking about what the Pebble watch was going to look like in the next couple of years, if he was going to be able to survive.
By the way, it's interesting that of all of those, you brought up Pebble, which I haven't heard the name of in a while. So Pebble was a crowdfunded watch, right?
Yeah.
It was an Apple Watch competitor of sorts. It's interesting that they were at the time one of the biggest Kickstarter crowdfunding and media, the tech bloggers in particular loved them. And at the same time, you also had Fitbit coming out. I mean, they were very neck and neck timing wise. And it's interesting to me that Fitbit not only took off and went where it did. I was personally very skeptical on Pebble, only because the amount of things they were trying to do was just insane. What was that like on the other side of things? I'm very curious.
I mean, I was talking with Eric Megakovsky, the CEO, so we would talk about it, like what the new features were, how he was doing it, etc. And he wasn't really doing anything differently. I think he was, so there's something I'm writing about right now. I'm trying to figure out what the thesis is, but it's the idea that back in the 70s, everybody had a Pong game. Everybody from like Montgomery Ward to Sear, your friend in the garage, you could buy the chip and you could build a Pong game. It was fairly simple. Right. And with enough, there's not a huge feature set by any stretch of the imagination, but you can kind of add a little bit something to the thing, or you could just leave it like it is, and you could just make a Pong game. When we were writing about all that stuff, that was kind of the heyday of single board computing, Raspberry Pis. So the ability to iterate and test on new hardware had just come about. Before, it required you had to send to China to make some chips and get the chips back, test them if they worked. If they didn't, you had to send back, etc. And so what he was offering was kind of state of the art, but it was also kind of because we'd gone to CES all the time. It was also basically standard. Like every smartwatch had those features. All he did was put a better face on them and a better package. So you could kind of go in like the depths of CES and find these devices. And then you could say to those people, hey, I want to do this, 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 and this. And they would code it for you and then build it for you, and you could start selling it. And that's where all that stuff comes from. Yeah, he wanted to do a lot, but it's because he could do a lot. A lot of the stuff that we're seeing now that was being added to watches was available back then, but it didn't make sense from battery wise, or it didn't make sense for the processor. But now it's a lot easier.
It really is an amazing time of gadgetry, because I don't know about you, personally, I find it both awesome and super fun and super lame all at the same time. I can't quite explain the difference. I find that sort of since the iPhone changed the way we think about hardware in so many different ways, right? Because now everything is sort of hardware adjacent to your iPhone. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like you brought up Slingbox, which obviously I, was part of. But when I think about any of that sort of mid 2000s generation hardware, the whole point of it was it had to do its job. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like TiVo, great example. You remember the early, like the Rio PMP 100
Yep.
MP3 player and like all those early gadgets, they had to just do their thing without fail. They weren't considered the way they are today, like 45-cent replaceable on Amazon. I'm curious how you compare and contrast those times.
Well, I mean, there were no updates either, so it just worked, right? So, I mean, unless it was internet connected. So maybe the TiVo got internet connected and it got better over time. But I mean, even with the TiVo, you're looking at a mini PC that just had a really nice had a nice interface. I think those times were important because it allowed everybody to triangulate. It allowed hardware vendors to figure out the best ways to build this stuff, and it also allowed them to figure out what people wanted. Because before 2008 was was iPhone year, you didn't really have that much hardware. You had a calculator, right. You had a camera, you had some like music gear that maybe you could have, maybe you had an MP3 player, that kind of stuff. So before that period, you left the house with your keys, and that's about it.
Right.
I mean, I don't recall carrying hardware with me. Then
right.
I was
carrying.
Like, yeah.
Keys, pager, digital camera,
maybe digital camera. If you really liked it that much, but
from I think you could argue you went like there were steps, but you went like Walkman basically to the iPod.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were
100%
steps along the way.
Yeah, I was still rocking a portable CD player, probably 2000 when I got back to the States, probably. So it was 2000, 2001. Wow. Still rocking around with a portable CD player, and that hardware couldn't really do a lot. And all of a sudden you had something in your pocket that could do everything. Now the question is that better or worse? I mean, I think we've created an environment for ourselves where the little quote unquote black mirror that we hold in our pockets that we stare at constantly, literally constantly, this like digital davening, is a massive detriment to us. And the only way out is to basically plug all that stuff into our brains, which is going to be even scarier because thinking about the interface and the stickiness of the interfaces that they've already built for us with us just staring at the devices, I can only imagine what kind of like Instagram zombies you're going to have where people on the train just like wiggling their eyes around, like staring at stuff.
People ask me sometimes, my kids sometimes even say like, do I think that the future will be like WALL-E is always a comp. And I'm sort of like, if you get rid of the real like apocalypse, like the massive like level of the storytelling and just go take it down to its essence, we're sort of there.
Yeah.
Right. We're like, if you walk down the streets of Manhattan and there are people walking on their phones, not looking up even the slightest. And I'm not trying to say that like cranky old guy, but more of we've reached a point where people feel comfortable enough to literally walk fully
without watching. Yeah.
Congested traffic and know how to do it. Like we've all managed, like we don't need the eye contact anymore. So it's, whether it's the social media, whether WALL-E to me doesn't mean we all have to be blobs sitting on motorized things. We're all sort of blobbing out in a different way. Do you feel like we're seeing shift back in any ways? I mean, I know there's lots and different, everybody's sort of flailing about on this these days.
I hope there's a shift. I think there is a shift coming, and I think the shift is implicit in the technology and also AI. We're going to get to a point where something in our ear tells us, "Hey, you should go drink some water. Your mom just called. Do you want to call her back?" That kind of stuff. Constant like litany of like a little Jiminy Cricket in our head. I think that type of notification is going to be an improvement over the requirement of us looking down. Instead, where you kind of like it'll check us for, I don't know, brain activity. Are you doing anything important? Are you driving a car right now? Then okay, I'm not going to tell you that your plants need watering. But eventually, there's going to be that situation, and I think that reduces the visibility of technology down to almost zero. We don't see where the technology is; it just exists around us, and that's one important aspect. And I think that pulls us away from the desire to just stare at pictures on a screen constantly or to watch little TikToks for a long time. Primarily because that the endorphins that we get from seeing a new thing constantly kind of goes away once we just know a new thing constantly, once we hear a new thing constantly. Your mom called, go do this. You have an appointment in 2 hours. You probably shouldn't eat that donut. Your sugar is up to whatever, your glycemic index is pretty high.
So
Kind of
should
like
that
just
like freeze your jaw and not even let you have the donut?
maybe, yeah, why not? Let's do that. Let's go. It's just like, or maybe just put our heads in jars and then we don't have to eat donuts at all, but that's a different story.
All right, I want to take us a little back. You had started to talk about your pivot from journalism into startup life, which we then took down a fun tangent. I'd love to hear a little bit about the past 10 years, maybe starting out with where you thought you were heading when you made that change in your career. Was there a signature moment? Did something kick that off, or was it just sort of time?
I think it was time. I got tired of like first off seeing really stupid people succeed. That was really frustrating. I mean, these weren't the greatest minds of our generation. These were just dudes who like made an app like Snapchat and like Instagram and all this other crap. It was just basically these guys who made something and they got really lucky for various reasons. So I figured, okay, I've seen all this stuff. I've seen people do this over and over again, and maybe I can get lucky too. What I didn't understand at the time was that most of these folks had a product market fit that was instantaneous. So like a Facebook launch, that was instantaneous. They got, I don't know, 100,000 users, 200,000, a million, et cetera, et cetera. Snapchat got a lot because it was basically allowed you to send nudes without, I don't know, worry about something doing a screenshot. There are a couple other apps, and I equate this to the 7 deadly sins. Any app that appeases one of the 7 deadly sins is a winner. Sloth is Uber and Seamless and all this stuff, food delivery stuff. Lust is Grinder and Tumblr and whatchamacallit, Tinder and all that other stuff. Need is Robinhood. Avarice is Instagram. You want to see what other people are doing. That could also be lust, etc. So anything that appease that scratch that itch was going to win. So anything outside of that was kind of, you took a flyer. So something like selling our remittance system. We were too nice about it. We wanted grandma to get money from America. It wasn't like you could pay your, I don't know, drug dealer. So we didn't allow that. So it didn't take off. And then we also did another thing called Jaywalk, which allowed you to walk and get discounts on food and stuff. So if you walked a certain number of miles, you'd get a discount from a coffee shop. We got like 100,000 users, but we also realized, people don't want to walk. It's sloth, so they don't want to walk. They want to get $1 off coffee if they drive there, or they want to get $1 off coffee if they watch a video or something like that. We did a brief idea that was called Hype Hop, which was if you stare at a video, it will know that you're looking away from the video and stop the video. So the goal was to say, okay, we want you to watch this video on, I don't know, this commercial, and then you can get free money, or you can get a coupon or something like that. And we realized that wasn't going to work because people just didn't want to. People had no attention span anyway. So that would, like, for the $1 coupon, they're not going to sit there and stare at something for 5 minutes. And it also was kind of creepy because it was watching your eyes the whole time.
But by the way,
I had a couple of folks that I would work with over and over again. This guy Victor, who was Ukrainian, is in Portugal now, and he and I would do a lot of development. Rich Svinkin, who we went to school with, he and I did a lot of the startups. I kind of stuck with the same guys. Now the question is, and this is that if I had been with different guys, or if I had different operators or different CTOs, would things have been different? I don't know. I don't think so. And I think we kind of riffed off each other pretty well.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. I don't know how you answer, right? If you've got the right groove and people are moving the right way, is there a better? Is there a worse? Is more friction sometimes better? I've had a couple of people I've worked with year in and year out, and then other folks sort of come and go through different times. And it's so hard to figure out what makes the dynamic so special when it is, and what's not there when it isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And with the ideas that you had, I mean, it could have been anything from the literal day you launched one could have just been the wrong day, all the way up to when you think about the ones where they did make it. We know so many of those stories are just the right sequence of events that happened.
And I also don't want to like disparage their skill, but it is like, it's, if your product market fit works immediately, then you're successful. Like I do my podcast Keep Going a lot,
Right.
and the other day I talked to a guy who made a unique musical instrument. It was some kind of thing where you're supposed to be able to play like EDM on stage with just like almost like playing a guitar. And he was trying to sell this thing. He did a Kickstarter. It kind of did well. It was doing just well enough to make him continue doing it. And then he went and saw one of his heroes, Moog, the guy who invented the Moog synthesizers. And he saw this guy like flogging devices at some event. And it was
Okay.
just like, it's kind of shabby. And it was like, oh, so this guy defined the music of a century. His products have been used in every single major like record since, I don't know, Michael Jackson. And he's over here looking like he just rolled out of bed trying to sell devices that nobody wants to buy anymore because they're probably too expensive. So he kind of realized to this, okay, this is bad. So he kind of quit. He kind of quit that. He
Wow.
did another product, which was some kind of like AI for lawyers or something like that. And immediately he got like 1,000 signups, and people like just loved it. And he knew that this was the product to keep working on. And that instantaneous click is super valuable. Now, the faster you get to that click, the better.
Right.
Because if you're sitting there coding for, I don't know, a year, and you don't see that click during any of that time, and then you're expecting it to happen on day one when you launch, it's never going to happen.
We're
You're
on
kind of
year
host.
3 of this startup,
Yeah.
and while we've in some ways we have some amazing success at the product market fit, and there are other areas like our direct random user sign up still not as strong as we need it to be,
Mm-hmm.
and we just keep throwing ideas at the wall, looking at the data, looking at what's happening. But I think you're so right that sometimes you can throw something out there and it's just like people are almost like lining up just to use it,
Yeah. Yeah.
or get a chance. When you think about things you're building today, how do these different parts of your journey show up in what you do, and how is the old journalist in you showing up? I mean, obviously you have your podcast, but when you think about your current pursuits.
Yeah. I mean, like if I build something, I know I'm building it to scratch an itch that I know a lot of people have. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of the products that I've kind of built, like for example, I wanted a podcast discovery tool, so I built one. It wasn't app based, I realized, so it didn't really take off, but at least I got to the point where I was like, it was working pretty well. Another thing was an automatic journalism system where you could basically click a button and you could write news stories based on an RSS feed, and it would
Oh,
rewrite
wow.
rewrite news stories automatically and upload them to WordPress. That worked really well, but I basically scared everybody with that, and it just didn't. It was just like it was too early and simultaneously too dangerous for a lot of people. So they were kind of upset by the concept itself. So I couldn't get very far.
And so are you now in that phase? Are you currently in a stage where you're iterating on ideas and bringing things out?
Yeah, I mean, I just code something up in Laravel or whatever, get it up on the site, and see if it works. Usually, it's like if I do it the right way, if I post it on my newsletter, post it on socials and stuff, I get a couple of users sign up. But I've never had that super product market fit. I think it's important. What's his name? Butterfield over at Slack, Stuart. He was building a second lifestyle game, like a 3D game where people were going to walk around and talk to each other, and it wasn't working constantly. And his whole thing is he has constantly been working in chat. He'd constantly be working in communications apps. I think he was like early IRC. He was like coding his own like communication servers, that kind of stuff. And he needed a server, he needed a way to chat between users and the dev team for this new app. And he sat there and he was coding and coding, and he made this thing. It was kind of an aside, and they made it as easy as possible to sign up. You take a link, you click it, and you're already in the room. That thing is what they called Slack. And once Slack took off, once everybody realized, oh, all I need to do to log in is just click this link, and I'm going to log in, and I'm in the room, and I can start chatting. And I also have a free chat room up to a point. It's great. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And everything else, all of his other products, very similar to that musical instrument that guy was talking about, were left by the wayside because there just was no point. There was no market there, or the market was too uncertain. And when you have a sure thing, you go with the sure thing.
So you just brought up Stuart, who also, by the way, for the people who might know the name from elsewhere, he was also one of the co-founders of Flickr. So great career there. Are there folks that have been in your personal orbit, because and you have a unique thing in that you've been on stage with some celebrities? Are there folks that, whether it's in a 5-minute interaction or 5 years of working together, is there someone out there that like brings a life lesson to you that you're really thrilled you got to have that moment in life?
Oh man, you know what? Like just recently, I interviewed Billy August. He was a filmmaker. He did Night Train to Lisbon, Dutch guy, and he's the reason why I bring him up is he was probably the most, after doing all these podcasts and talking to all these people, he was probably the most insightful person that I met. Like for example, he was talking about how if you're going to do a movie, you need to go in with every scene, everything prepared, prep everything before you even start filming. And to a degree, that lesson should expand into everybody's world, even if it's just doing it in your head. You should know what tab A does when it goes into slot B before everybody else does, before your dev does, before your CO does, before your users do. You should know what those things are going to do, and that way, when you get started, you're not wasting anybody's time. In his context, it was all about movie making. You're sitting there with people in the movies and sitting around like in a studio waiting to shoot something, and you say, okay, we're shooting this, 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 and this. Whereas when you're trying to do a dev job, for example, when you're trying to build something, you don't give the developer, I need an app that can take these pictures and make them really pretty and then put them on the internet. You say, I want them to go to this server. I want them to look like this. I want the ability to do this. I want to be able to share, etc. And it all has to be thought out beforehand. That even if you're not a technical person, doing that gives the technical people that you're going to be working with a leg up. That gives them a lot faster access to your brain. So you want to think about how all this stuff works. A lot of people just kind of like catch as catch can and kind of like build stuff and just see if it works. The first iteration of that has to be well thought out. The rest of your iterations, the rest of the things, you can pivot all you want, but unless you have that first crystalline vision, you probably don't have anything.
I like that a lot. It ascribes to something I was once told when I worked for Blake at Sling, and he had a whole thing on. I have a whole bunch of bites of wisdom from him, but was basically do everything you can to get as much right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that sounds very analogous there. So, John, what are you working on now that you want people to be aware of? Maybe go check out. You have your podcast.
Just go to keepgoingpod.com. I'll listen to that. I've been interviewing. I think I've done 200 something interviews, and I do it as sort of penance. I used to be really mean when I used to go on like all these events. Like people come up with their idea, and I'm like, oh, that's whatever. I've never seen that before. So I don't. So at this point, I'm just going to be like wide open and say, okay, let's talk about what you built and how it works. The other thing is I want the other side of entrepreneurship to be visible. There's so much geography that people are just saying like, oh, this guy was an overnight success. And I want people to understand there's no overnight successes. These things required years and years of trial and error. And if there was an overnight success, the person who achieved that overnight success is probably no longer in the driver's seat, primarily because they sold out to a lot of people who gave them a lot of money and a lot of resources to make themselves an overnight success. So you're in that kind of dichotomy. So I want people to, first off, I want to listen to startups. I want to listen to people who have failed, or are having trouble. Because when I was having trouble, there was nobody there. Nobody gave a shit. And it was actually, and I've seen plenty of that stuff, plenty of suicides, plenty of people who just gave up and were depressed. And second off, I want just people to understand, if you don't have to be a psychopath to do this. And anybody who tells you that they're constantly winning and blessed, #blessed, etc., is lying to you. And we got to solve that.
I love that completely. I think, and that's part of why I started this, honestly, John, is to get more stories out there. I love hearing about your journey. I love that we've known each other for a freaking quarter of a century, man. Mm-hmm. And I hope we have another quarter of a century at least to keep sharing these stories and having our paths cross.
If all goes according to plan, we'll all be inside the matrix at some point, and we can just keep flying around and living and doing whatever we want for the next 300 years.
I think we're already there, but I'm not quite sure. All right, my friend, a pleasure. Thanks again for your time, and go check out the Keep Going podcast and keep subscribing here. Would love your feedback. Thank you so much.